Hi, I'm Will Petty. I'm from the Global Trade and Customs Consulting team at Maersk. Philippe, thanks very much for having us here at the forum. I wonder if you could just give us a bit of background on the Global Alliance for Trade Facilitation.
Yes, of course. Hi, Will, and welcome to Geneva. The Global Alliance for Trade Facilitation is a public-private partnership. It was established in 2015. We are funded by the governments of the United States, Canada, and Germany. And we are operationalized by 4 organizations: the World Economic Forum, the International Chamber of Commerce, the Center for International Private Enterprise, and GIZ, the German Development Agency. And we work as a partnership with over 40 multinational companies and over 500 SMEs and local companies around the world. And working with beneficiary governments, we design, formulate projects aimed at overcoming obstacles in trade.
Can you give some examples maybe of the sorts of projects that you've worked on, the sort of changes that you've implemented in different countries and maybe some of the impact that they've had?
Sure. So in the past 7 years, we have developed from a startup organization to a point where today we operate about 30 projects in 25 countries around the world. All our projects are very pragmatic, very targeted, because the private sector is able to identify where those blockages are. And working from the bottom up with governments, we devise ways of simplifying processes and digitalizing processes. A lot of our work is focused on digitalization, but we also operate in areas such as simplifying, supporting AEO principles, authorized economic operators, advanced rulings, and other customs, but also regulatory authority issues that need to be looked at.
We know as Maersk and like our customers as well that these are sorts of things that make a real difference for business. These things that cut the time and cost of doing business, create more predictability, and so on. Do you kind of measure that? How do you know when you've had a success, had an impact in these projects?
In that sense, we have been able to establish methodologies to be able to pinpoint where we are able to bring efficiency and what does this mean in value terms. To give you an example, we've been doing some work on digitalization in Morocco, and the return on investment has been tremendous. For an investment by donors and private sector of about $750,000, we are measuring a saving to the economy of about $40 million per annum. And we get similar results in many other countries, such as Ecuador or Fiji or Madagascar.
You talked about AEO, authorized economic operator, trusted trader regimes. These are hugely important and can create a much more sort of conducive environment for trade. And we see where it works, and we see where there's perhaps room to go a bit further.
And this is why we rely so much on the private sector. But we rely on large private sector, multinationals, but also, of course, SMEs and local companies. We use the large companies because they tend to have a global footprint and they tend to have additional bandwidth, internal resources to be able to support us. But the objective really here is to be able to facilitate trade for local companies and for SMEs in countries, because that is where you are going to get the economic growth. And that is very important. But the private sector is key because the private sector knows where the issues are. Without the private sector, there is no trade. And so it is so important that the private sector is involved and that it forms part of the solution. The burden cannot just be on governments. The focus has got to be given on bringing governments and private sector working hand in hand in this manner.
It's such a good example of that. You've talked about the importance of the public-private partnerships in developing and implementing the projects on the ground. But also, I think I see one of the values of the alliance is the kind of the long-term sustainability of that, right? You do a project, but then that's not the end of the public-private partnership. You're often building frameworks then last, a long time in the future and will themselves generate more and more kind of trade facilitation and other beneficial projects because of this kind of collaboration with business and government. I think that's one of the real values of an organisation like the Alliance, and why we're really keen to support it.
So, Will, what's next in your mind in terms of the development of trade facilitation for the future?
So I think there's a real opportunity now, both in terms of what's available to us all in terms of technology, what's changes are being made in terms of legislation and regulatory arrangements and so on, that means that we can do a lot more with data to really transform the trade facilitation environment and go a lot further than we have done so far. There's opportunities now to use data from the supply chain, right from the start of when someone makes a purchase order to buy goods in the exporting country. There's ways to use that data now, get it to the customs administrations, other border agencies in the destination country, potentially even before the container gets on a vessel. And for those agencies to analyze that data and make those risk-based decisions, whilst the goods are still on the high seas. There's opportunities, with Internet of Things, smart containers, ability to use that supply chain data, better use of trusted trader regimes, to potentially get to a point where, for some traders, you can have a completely frictionless border. I think the capability is there to do that, but we're not quite there yet. I think it's still quite a big transformation, I think, sort of culturally, but also in terms of legislation. But it's possible, and I do think it's heading in that way. There are a number of kind of pilots and examples of that around the world where the envelope is being pushed on that a little bit. So I definitely think that's the way forward, and I think we all need to be working together to make that happen, right? I think governments need to be working with each other, because there's no point just doing it in one country. You need to look at kind of supply chains. And then, as we've been talking about, business and government needs to be working together. And I think if we do that, we can really sort of drive that transformation.
That's very exciting prospects. Thank you, Will. I would like to conclude by thanking Maersk for being a founding member of the Alliance over 7 years ago. And we look forward to our continuing collaboration in trade facilitation.
Thanks, Philippe. It's a great initiative, and we're really pleased to be working on it.